The battle for Kupiansk did not begin with explosions or dramatic announcements, but with silence. A silence broken only by the distant thud of artillery and the quiet movement of Ukrainian units threading through forests, riverbanks, and shattered villages. For months, Kupiansk had stood as one of Russia's most critical logistical lifelines in eastern Ukraine, a city whose rail yards and road networks fed men, ammunition, and armor toward the front. To Moscow, losing Kupiansk was unthinkable. To Kiev, reclaiming it was inevitable. As dawn crept over the eastern horizon, Ukrainian forces initiated what would become one of the most decisive and brutal pushes of the war. Precision strikes targeted Russian command posts, ammunition depots, and communication hubs, severing coordination before ground troops ever made contact. Drones hovered relentlessly overhead, feeding real-time intelligence back to assault units that moved with an efficiency born of hard lessons learned over years of fighting. Russian defenses, once layered and confident, began to unravel under the pressure. The Russian command had fortified Kupiansk with trenches, concrete bunkers, anti-tank obstacles, and artillery positions spread across surrounding villages. On paper, it was a fortress. In reality, it was held together by exhausted troops, stretched supply lines, and fractured morale. Ukrainian forces exploited every weakness. Instead of charging headlong into the strongest points, they maneuvered around them, isolating units and cutting off reinforcements. Roads that once delivered Russian supplies became deadly corridors under constant Ukrainian fire. Fighting intensified as Ukrainian infantry pushed closer to the outskirts of the city. Urban combat is among the most dangerous forms of warfare, and Kupiansk was no exception. Apartment blocks, factories, and warehouses turned into battlegrounds where every window and doorway could conceal danger. Ukrainian soldiers advanced building by building, often under heavy fire, relying on discipline, coordination, and trust in one another to survive. The sounds of battle echoed through empty streets as civilians who had not already fled sheltered in basements, waiting for the nightmare to end. Russian resistance was fierce but increasingly chaotic. Units that were supposed to hold specific sectors found themselves cut off, surrounded, or without orders. Communication breakdowns left commanders blind, unable to respond effectively to Ukrainian movements. Attempts to counterattack were quickly crushed by accurate artillery fire and ambushes that left Russian armor burning in the streets. Each failed response further eroded confidence among Russian troops, many of whom had already endured months of relentless fighting. As Ukrainian forces pressed deeper into Kupiansk, the scale of the operation became clear. This was not a symbolic raid or a limited objective. This was a full-scale liberation effort designed to break Russian control of a key logistical hub and shift the balance of power across the entire region. Ukrainian engineers worked under fire to clear mines and debris, opening paths for armored vehicles and supply convoys. Medics moved constantly, pulling wounded soldiers from the front lines and saving lives under conditions that tested the limits of human endurance. The turning point came when Ukrainian units succeeded in severing the last major supply route, feeding Russian forces inside the city. Without ammunition, food, or reinforcements, Russian positions began to collapse. Some units attempted to withdraw under cover of darkness, only to be intercepted by Ukrainian forces who had anticipated the move. Others surrendered, laying down their weapons after realizing the situation was hopeless. The psychological impact was profound, not only on those inside Kupiansk but across the wider front. By the time Ukrainian flags were raised over key administrative buildings, the outcome was undeniable. Kupiansk was no longer under Russian control. The city, battered and scarred, had been liberated through a combination of strategic planning, relentless pressure, and extraordinary courage. The cost was high, measured in lives lost and streets reduced to rubble, but the victory carried immense strategic and symbolic weight. The liberation of Kupiansk sent shockwaves through Russian military planning. Losing the city disrupted supply chains that had supported operations across northeastern Ukraine. Rail lines once used to funnel equipment toward the front were now in Ukrainian hands, forcing Russian forces to reroute supplies over longer, more vulnerable paths. This logistical blow weakened Russian positions far beyond Kupiansk itself, exposing vulnerabilities that Ukrainian commanders were quick to exploit. For Ukraine, the victory reinforced confidence in its military strategy and its ability to reclaim occupied territory. It demonstrated that Russian defensive lines, no matter how heavily fortified, were not impenetrable. More importantly, it showed that Ukrainian forces could coordinate complex, multi-phase operations involving infantry, armor, artillery, drones, and intelligence assets with remarkable effectiveness. Each success built momentum, strengthening morale not only among soldiers, but among civilians across the country. The human dimension of the battle cannot be ignored. Soldiers on both sides faced unimaginable stress, fear, and exhaustion. Ukrainian troops spoke of fighting not only for territory, but for families, homes, and a future free from occupation. Many had personal ties to the region, making every step forward deeply emotional. For civilians emerging from shelters after the fighting subsided, the sight of Ukrainian forces brought relief mixed with grief for what had been lost. Internationally, the liberation of Kupiansk reshaped perceptions of the conflict. Allies took note of Ukraine's growing operational sophistication and renewed their commitments to military and economic support. Analysts began reassessing Russia's ability to hold occupied territory in the face of sustained Ukrainian pressure. The narrative shifted from questions of if Ukraine could reclaim key areas to when and how far it could advance. Russian leadership, meanwhile, faced difficult questions. The loss of Kupiansk exposed flaws in planning, intelligence, and command structures. Public explanations struggled to mask the reality of a significant defeat. For Russian soldiers still deployed along the front, the message was clear. Even the most heavily defended positions could fall, and retreat was no longer just a distant possibility, but an immediate concern. As the dust settled, Ukrainian forces began consolidating their gains, clearing remaining pockets of resistance and securing supply routes into the city. Reconstruction planning started almost immediately, even as sporadic fighting continued in nearby areas. The road ahead remained long and dangerous, but Kupiansk stood as proof that progress was possible, even against a determined and well-equipped adversary. The battle for Kupiansk will be studied for years as an example of modern warfare shaped by technology, intelligence, and adaptability. It highlighted the decisive role of drones, precision strikes, and real-time battlefield awareness. It also underscored the enduring importance of human courage and leadership in moments where machines and plans alone are not enough. For Ukraine, Kupiansk became more than a liberated city. It became a symbol of resilience and determination, a reminder that occupation is not permanent and that perseverance can alter the course of history. Each reclaimed street and shattered building told a story of sacrifice and resolve, of ordinary people caught in extraordinary circumstances. As the war continues, the echoes of the battle for Kupiansk will influence decisions on both sides. Commanders will adjust strategies, politicians will recalibrate expectations, and soldiers will carry the memory of what was achieved and what was lost. In the brutal push that reclaimed Kupiansk, Ukraine demonstrated not only military capability but an unyielding commitment to reclaiming its land, no matter the cost. And in that commitment lies the true significance of Kupiansk's liberation, not merely as a tactical victory or a logistical gain, but as a powerful statement that the fight for Ukraine's future is far from over and that each step forward, no matter how hard, one brings the country closer to reclaiming what was taken and securing what remains.